Everything you struggle with, everything I struggle with, is something every business owner in history has struggled with at some point. And a lot of them made it out okay. So we know it's not something new. It's not something impossible. It typically starts with us and our belief about it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Physician Growth Accelerator, a show where we break down your private medical practice vitals into systems, give you the tools to diagnose root cause of what may be restricting your growth, and most importantly, prescribe what to do about it. I'm Zed Williamson, your host, and I believe that every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. And I believe that because it gives us freedom in business where we can say, okay, this is all on purpose. We may not like the actual result. That's okay. It's a perfect outcome. All we need to do is change the system to get something different. Now, today we're going to talk about struggles in your private medical practice. And there's a single thought that I want you to walk away with by the end of today's episode. And that is, I want you to believe that you have more control over what goes on in your practice than you do right now. So let's set you out on the path. There's a book written by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, there's a general thesis, an overarching idea that talks about that our freedom as humans is in the space between stimulus and response, meaning we are in control of that. And there's a lot of books on leadership and business that pulls from that concept, and it's in the frameworks. But the general idea is that our freedom exists in how we respond to stimulus. And one of those concepts is being proactive. Now, when I say proactive, that doesn't mean let me think ahead and do things that are on my to-do list. That's not the definition of proactive in this sense. It's the opposite of reactive. So reactive means we use victim language, and victim language doesn't help us out. So I want you to think about your medical practice. Maybe you wake up early and you think to yourself, man, I've got a day, I'm just grinding all day long, seeing patients, and you're putting your head down and getting it done. And there's problems, right? There's maybe some in-office drama. Maybe you're seeing that there's a reduction in insurance reimbursement, and you feel like you don't have any control over that. Maybe you just get this up and down, different number of new patients coming from referrals, and you feel like you don't have control over that. Or you're getting referrals, but they're not the right type of patients. Maybe you're dealing with turnover, where you have employees and maybe you're struggling with them a little bit, and you're worried about getting rid of them because you're not sure about how to get new ones, but then they leave and you're freaking out because now you have to replace the human. All these things are normal struggles in business. It can feel like it has more weight in the medical profession because really generating revenue is on your shoulders. And what we talk about on this episode or on this show is the importance of building a strong medical business. We are going to assume that the clinical aspect is always number one, and that we're treating patients the best way possible and bringing the best care to patients in need. But the only way you can do that is if you have a strong business. You have to build a moat around your private practice if you want to stay independent so that you can stay in control. So I want you to think about all those struggles. And I'm guessing that one or two or all of those things are on your mind, and maybe even more that I haven't said. So what happens is our brain is built, unfortunately, for negativity bias. Means we look for the negative, and we can start using victim language. Like I mentioned earlier, victim language is simply things that are absolutes, like, that's just the way I am, or I have to do this, or I can't think of a better way to do things. And this language becomes habit for ourselves. And it makes sense, right? You're busy, you're waking up early, you're getting thrown little fires to put out. Maybe you hire people to try to take care of it, so you try to ignore it, but it just keeps piling up. And it can seem like you're doing more and more work, reimbursement is coming down, costs are going up, and it's just a challenge. Specifically, for instance, in California, if you're in a medical practice, there's the increased minimum wage that's going to happen over time. That's probably weighing heavily on a lot of people's minds. I mean, imagine minimum wage of $25 an hour for any employee within your private practice. That can be tough. So what does this have to do with being proactive? Now, remember, proactive means the opposite of reactive. And you have more control than you think. So let's break this down. Reactive means something happens and you feel like almost like it's an attack and you can't help what you do. Proactive is the opposite of that. You can control how you respond to things. And it's not about ignoring emotion. It's not about, wait, let me try to control my response. It's about understanding what your beliefs are. And this is when it's a good time for us to ask ourselves why, where we can say, okay, why do I believe that I have to do this? Why do I believe that this is the only way for me? Because here's the thing. In business, everything you struggle with, everything I struggle with, is something every business owner in history has struggled with at some point. And a lot of them made it out okay. So we know it's not something new. It's not something impossible. It typically starts with us and our belief about it. So when it comes to referrals, maybe you believe that there's no way for you to affect the type of referrals that come into your office, or that there's no way for you to generate new patients that are the ideal patient for your practice without the use of referrals. So ask yourself, why do you believe that? And a proactive mindset is one that starts with, I will figure out different ways. This is in my control. The way I respond is in my control. And there's true freedom in that concept. And so when we think about beliefs and how those beliefs trigger what our responses are, a way that I play a trick on myself is anytime I catch myself believing something that maybe puts me in that victim mindset where I'm thinking like, oh man, I have to do this and I can't, or this is going to, I can't believe this is the way, all that stuff that's not very helpful. So I like to catch myself when I'm doing it. And then I'm going to ask a question. So imagine you're a fan of sports and there's a football game between two teams and you are a serious fan of one of the teams and that team wins. What happens? You're happy, right? And what about a fan of the other team? They're sad. Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit. You're happy, they're sad, it's just an event. The event is unbiased, right? Two teams played, one had a higher score than the other. You were happy, they were sad. So it shows you that your emotional response is specifically tied to your belief about what that event meant. Some person in Alaska, they don't care. So if they don't care, one person's sad, one person's happy from an unbiased event, it's in your control. And that's the same with business. When you think about those patients and when you say to yourself, we're not getting enough patients, referrals aren't sending enough, you put yourself in a bad spot because you're talking yourself into believing that that is the only way, as opposed to stepping back and thinking about, are there other ways for me to get patients into my practice that are ideal for who we are? Maybe you're dealing with turnover, like I mentioned earlier, and you might be saying victim-like statements like, it's hard to find good people, or how am I going to find people at the rate that I have to pay them, or no one wants to work, or maybe you have some kind of bias towards a generation of workers, and you kind of put this blanket statement saying, no one does this because they're this. So listen to what you're doing. You're allowing yourself to fire off these emotional statements based on beliefs that you can change. You're being reactive. You're allowing the stimulation to determine your response. You're actually giving up freedom. I don't know about you. I don't want to give up freedom. This has to do with understanding that you control the response. And when it comes to turnover, there are ways for you to hire people that are perfect fits for your organization. They come to work excited. They work hard for the pay that makes sense for your business. They go home and they're excited about the next day of work. They bring something extra to the office. That's possible. It happens all over the country. When we think about insurance reimbursement, maybe there's a thought that I can't control how much an insurance company pays us. That might be the case, but what are you doing about purposely designing your appointment schedule? Meaning making sure that your schedule is full of the most ideal patients for your practice. And you'll hear me say ideal patient. What do I mean? I mean patients that, number one, they're dealing with something that you can fix. Number two, you love fixing that thing. Number three, it's healthy for your business from a reimbursement standpoint. If you take control of those things, now you're not as concerned about what's happening with insurance and reimbursements because you are in control. Our brain likes to let us off the hook. Our brain wants us to think that we're comfortable. And so it gets us to be lazy and say things like, I have to. I can't figure this out. I can't get the right patients. I can't get the right employees. And when we start going down that path, we're handing freedom away. We're saying, I'm a victim and I'm like in a sailboat with no keel and here I am. I don't know about you. I'm not really fond of that concept. You have the choice. You have the freedom of that gap between stimulus and response that Viktor Frankl talks about. And you can take control of your practice. So when you think about your practice, whatever you're unhappy with right now, I want you to own it. I want you to say, I am purposely creating this outcome. It is a perfect outcome for the system that I am operating. When you start saying things like that, you'll be more open to understanding tweaks that you can make. When you start owning the outcome, as opposed to putting blame off elsewhere, you put yourself in a position to affect change. You can control more of your practice than you currently think you can. There is tremendous freedom in that. There's tremendous freedom in the idea of being proactive. If you want to dive into that concept a little bit more, Stephen Covey wrote a book, The 7 Habits of highly effective people, that does a really good job of breaking down the framework of what being proactive means, of owning that gap between stimulus and response. Here's how I check to see if something interests me. When I come across a concept, if I say to myself, man, I want to teach this to my kids, that means I probably should be following it myself. So it's been beneficial for our business. And I know if you're in a position where you feel like you're on the struggle bus, you feel like you're out of control, and then you keep getting dealt little fires to put out, challenges. You just can't get over the hump and get on this nice cruise control and feel really in control in your business. One of the keys is for you to get out of being reactive and start to be proactive. Have that freedom between that stimulus and response. So I hope I've helped you think a little bit more towards the direction of you believing that you have more control over your practice than you currently did a few minutes ago. If you ever want to check your practice vitals, go to physicianaccelerator.com and click on Vitals. And always feel free to reach out to us for any other questions. Thank you, and we'll see you again on the Physician Growth Accelerator.